Sexual selection voice design. Effects of songbirds' early development conditions on its song repertoire. Good eaten equals good songs. Caitlin Hutchinson, eCall 182 Lab. The article I was assigned was Nestling Growth and Song Repertoire Size in Great Reed Warblers. Evidence for Song Learning as an Indicator Mechanism in Mate Choice. There is only one species used in this study, and that is the Acrocephalus aruncus, also known as the Great Reed Warbler. The Great Reed Warblers breed within the northern and mainland Europe, and then they migrate to sub-Saharan Africa during the winter season. They weigh anywhere from 20 to 50 grams, and they have low sexual dimorphism, meaning that the male and female do look different, but only slightly different, as you can see in the picture. Since this article specifically discusses the sexual preferences of females choosing males based on their songs, here's a short clip of a male warbler's song. So, the question being asked within this article is, does the early development of male reed warblers have an effect on their song repertoires? Furthermore, do certain factors present during the nestling stage have an effect on the male warbler's chances of being picked by a female to mate? Some important terms for this article are sexual selection, song repertoire, and intersexual selection. So, sexual selection is a form of natural selection that promotes certain traits, giving certain individuals a better opportunity for mating. Sexual selection determines which individuals have access to more mates. It can happen intrasexually, which is selection between one sex of the species, such as males fighting over a female, or intersexually, which happens between both sexes of a species. Today, we will be discussing intersexual selection. Intersexual selection is a sexual selection that happens between the males and females of a species. For example, a female peacock will pick a mate based on the male's spreading of his feathers. And finally, song repertoire. A song repertoire is a collection of songs similar to having them in a playbook. However, in the case of the warblers, its song repertoire is simply put the variations of syllables and the number of each syllable type in its song. So the larger the range of syllables, the larger the repertoire. The researchers of this article explored two hypotheses to further investigate the overall question. The first hypothesis is that the song repertoire of a male great reed warbler correlates to its development as a nestling and the stressors it experienced in its early life. This would suggest that the song repertoire of a male great reed warbler who experienced many stressors in its early life may have a lower repertoire and may be less desirable for females, whereas a male great reed warbler that experienced very low stressors in its life may have a larger song repertoire and may be more desirable for females when choosing a mate. The second hypothesis is that males that have more preferable song repertoires are more phenotypically superior, which can have effect on their genotypic superiority. These two hypotheses will answer the question of whether or not different conditions during the nestling stage affect a male warbler's song repertoire later on in its life, and if the connection can be made between nestling conditions and female choices in sexual selection. The second hypothesis explores the connection between phenotypically and genotypically superior males and their song repertoire. There were two main sections in this article discussing the methods of the experiment. The first section was the nestling measurements. The researchers used these methods to ensure that the data collected was as accurate as possible. The two main ways that these researchers measured the warbler nestlings was measuring the body mass and the length of the innermost primary feather. These two measurements were used to estimate the growth rate of the nestlings. They also located most of the nests during the nest building stage in order to ensure accurate dates for the stages of egg laying, hatching, and fledgling. The second section was the song repertoire measurements. After the first winter, the same nestlings that the researchers identified using aluminum and colored rings for labeling were observed. They recorded a few minutes of each warbler's song and then used a sonogram to determine the size of each repertoire. The size of each repertoire was measured using a syllable system. These two collections of data allowed for the size of the song repertoire and the conditions of the nestlings to be compared. There were three main sections within this article exploring the results of the experiment. The first section discussed the standardizing of the body mass and feather measurements. The researchers standardized these two measurements because there was a significant increase in both, depending on the age and time of day when the nestlings were measured. This allows for standardized measurements of body mass and feather length to be used for the graphs and discussion. The second section discussed the effect of the mass and feather length on the phenotype in adult warblers. The data collected suggests that both of these measurements are good predictors of the adult's tarsus length and the structural size of these warblers. Therefore, these measurements can be said to be good predictors of reproductive success. Finally, the third section discussed the effect of mass and feather length on the repertoire size in the adult warblers. For both the body mass and the feather length data, there was a positive correlation, as we will see in the graphs on the next slide. These researchers also tested other factors and their possible relation to repertoire size. Some of the factors tested were the date of the hatching, or if these nestlings were in primary or secondary female nests. Neither of these factors had an effect on the size of the repertoire. These two figures from the article were created with the data collected within the experiment. Figure 1 shows the results of the data collected from the standardized feather length test, and Figure 2 shows the results of the data collected from the standardized body mass test. Both of these graphs compare the standardized test to the first year repertoire size, located on the y-axis of both of these graphs. Also, both of these figures support the hypothesis that nestling conditions do have an effect on the song repertoire of a mature male great reed warbler. These graphs show a positive relationship between repertoire size and each respective standardized test. Furthermore, they provide evidence supporting a mechanism that correlates a song to a male's phenotypic or genotypic quality, supporting the second hypothesis. To conclude, the researchers of this article explored the results of their experiment in the discussion section of this article. Overall, the data collected supports the previously stated hypotheses. There is evidence to support both of these hypotheses. A male reed warbler's song repertoire is affected by its early life conditions. and that a male's song is likely a good indicator of the desirability and quality of his genotypic and phenotypic traits. Overall, the researchers concluded that using the data of body mass and feather length, females selecting males with larger song repertoires are also selecting males that, as nestlings, managed better than average or experienced less stressors. Now we will discuss two questions pertaining to sexual selection based on the article given. So the first question is, what exactly is the trait under examination that determines whether individuals successfully reproduce? So the trait that is under examination is the song repertoire of a male great reed warbler. This trait determines whether or not individuals successfully reproduce because female great reed warblers select males based on their song repertoire. And if males are selected, then they will successfully reproduce and pass on their genes. Question 2 asks, does your article provide an example of intrasexual selection or intersexual selection? So this article provided an example of intersexual selection because the sexual selection occurs between both the female and the male warblers. Intrasexual selection is sexual selection that occurs between the same sex of a species, such as elephant seals fighting each other to win a female. While the type of sexual selection discussed in this article is intersexual selection. And that is because it's between both of the sexes in the species, and the selection is basically up to the female's choice.